Lucca and Robo arrive in Antiquity to see their efforts in prehistory have paid off big time. Reptites, who have long since evolved into Dragonians, live alongside humans in all spheres of society. Robo's vision of peace between the two species has indeed come to pass. However, it's sad to say, racial harmony didn't guarantee a utopian world as Lucca and Robo had imagined. Instead, the peoples of the planet forged enmity along different lines, and this 12,000 BC is a battle zone. On the original timeline, the magic users of Zeal ascended to the clouds to reign over non-magic users, but in this broken Antiquity, an oppressed caste of magic-using Earthbound waged brutal, endless war against a sky-dwelling, technologically advanced, non-magical society. This conflict is the only life either side has ever known. However, as Lucca and Robo soon learn, they have arrived at a very particular, very important moment in time, just as a great power shift is taking place. When they dust themselves off from their trip through the Time Gate, they wander into the nearest town to meet the first of this new brand of Earthbound. A simple society of basic magic users live an impoverished life of little material wealth. Basic magical powers and a unifying, widespread practice of religious beliefs have supplied them with the resolve to continue fighting their endless war against the Zealians. However, the Earthbound have recently suffered a catastrophically demoralizing loss. Mere months ago, the Zealians raided the Earthbound's most sacred, most secret shrine and stole an ancient and precious artifact, a thing the Earthbound call the Angel's Whisper. This assault, led by the Guru of Life himself, has disrupted the delicate balance of power which has existed since before recorded history. You see, long ago, the Angel's Whisper granted its most devout protectors their greatest weapon, magic. It's this weapon that finally gave the Earthbound a foothold, a chance to try and seize their freedom from their slave masters in the clouds, and so it holds an irreplaceable cultural significance among the land-based peoples of the planet. The most pious among the Earthbound even revere the Angel's Whisper as an actual piece of their god, the Great Sleeper. Now that it is in the hands of the Zealians above, many Earthbound believe their certain and impending doom is at hand. Like Pico and Gob, Angel's Whisper is the name of an unused asset from the original Chrono Trigger, and although the Earthbound in this broken Antiquity may call it by a different name, we all know what this artifact is, the Frozen Flame. And just as we know it, Lucca knows it. Her blood chills to ice. How unsettling to think the Earthbound have become religious zealots beneath the sinister shadow of the Frozen Flame. Of course, an even more terrifying thought rises immediately. Had her actions in prehistory led to this? Deep down, she knows it is not a matter of if, but how. She needs answers. Unfortunately, they are hard to come by. As it turns out, there is other creepiness afoot. You see, no one's talking. Most of the Earthbound shut down, change the topic, or ignore her when she probes for information. It's like they're hypnotized. As she travels from colony to colony, Lucca starts to wonder if everyone's eerie, weird behavior has something to do with the mysterious, ethereal pyramid-shaped devices which lay scattered across the landscape. By now, she's seen human and Dragonian alike visiting these small pyramids in a hypnagogic state, eyes turned upward and mouth agape as if they were awaiting instruction. Although the things are seemingly part of daily life, people rarely discuss the small, technological pyramids which they call records. Perhaps creepiest of all, the pyramids look familiar to her. Lucca saw a similar device during her imprisonment in Chronopolis. Back then, she'd interacted with the machine once or twice, but ceased contact when she felt strange thoughts forming, as if she was losing herself. Fortunately, there are few NPCs who refuse to engage with the records. Every last one of them muses about the strangeness of the things and bemoans the social ostracism they feel by refusing to engage with the devices. These rare few NPCs are Lucca's most valuable source of information. One of them tells Lucca about a high priestess who once led the Earthbound. She and her powerful daughter allegedly used the Angel's Whisper to commune directly with the Great Sleeper. Another tells Lucca about the husband of the high priestess. He was once one of the rare voices for peace in a world of violence, and for a time he tempered the high priestess's combative nature. But all that changed after he went missing. As the story goes, he long studied the energy source for the floating kingdom, a powerful relic called the Sunstone. After becoming convinced the Sunstone would soon fail, he went seeking another power source. No matter the reason for his disappearance, he never returned. Shortly after, the High Priestess and her daughter vanished as well, but not before the High Priestess prophesied the appearance of the records and instructed the citizens to consult them regularly. It's generally believed that she took her daughter to find her husband. However, this theory doesn't sit well with the particular Earthbound who recounts the story. Universally, the Earthbound are saddened by the loss of the High Priestess, and one even suggests that if she were here now, they would not be standing on the precipice of disaster as they were. Yet another NPC suggests that after the Angel's Whisper was stolen, the Earthbound's remaining leaders lost their guidance, as they can no longer see with his eyes. The hair on the back of Lucca's neck stands up. It's sounding a lot more like Lavos, Gob, whatever it is still out there. She goes into a minor tailspin here and freaks out to Robo. Was their defeat of Lavos undone by her refusal to let the past go? Why hadn't she insisted on destroying the bits when they had the chance? What had she done? From his place securely fastened to her, Robo literally and figuratively has her back. He reminds Lucca that Azala deceitfully manipulated them both, and not to be so hard on herself. He advises they travel to the floating kingdom to gather more information. Unfortunately, the story above the clouds is as bleak as the one below. The floating kingdom is not the glittering haven of peace as it once was. Instead, it is covered in machines, grimy and industrial. After having a quick look around, Lucca curiously observes that although their technology is super advanced, it's also extremely old. It's as if the whole kingdom was inherited from the wiser ancestors of these Zealians, and then they forgot how to maintain it. Under the shadow of a huge fortress built into a mountain, Lucca and Robo decide to head for the city in the distance. However, it's not until they reach this city the eeriness of the whole situation levels up. What are the odds the Zealians of this world would also have chosen the name Kajar? A thought which had been creeping up in the back of Lucca's mind finally coalesces, and she shares it with Robo. There's something wrong here. Why are so many things the same? This world might look different, but too many themes were being repeated for it to be a coincidence. Why are there Earthbound? Why is there a floating kingdom? A sunstone? A guru of life? Why is the primary island in the sky a bizarre reflection of the one she'd been to before? Even down to the name, to the city of Kajar. It didn't make sense. Robo postulates perhaps existence must run according to a certain template. Could there be unassailable constants embedded in the river of time, which poked above the surface no matter which direction the river flowed? No doubt certain ideals were universal, for instance the forces of life, reason, and time as represented by the gurus. Maybe it only makes sense for things to be similar, as if thematic constants dictate there's only one real way the world can be, and the finer details are simply randomized by the rich tapestry of history. But then right after that, Robo buys his own ticket for the creepy train and says Luke is right. It's downright weird that the city before them is called Kajar, and that there are gurus in this kingdom as well. They'll just have to get answers inside. And so they enter Kajar. It's populated by mostly soldiers and engineers, who Lucca finds are likely to repeat certain phrases whenever engaging in conversation. Again, Lucca suspects their behavior is due to the records, which she is surprised to find are installed in Zeal as well. She'd assumed they were a technologically advanced tool of warfare the Zealians were using on the Earthbound, but if the records were here in Zeal and on the surface, who was really behind them? Just like on the surface, Lucca meets certain people who steer clear of the records. However, Lucca can barely tell them apart from the others up here. A primitive, base, and warlike mindset permeates the atmosphere. These Zealians are a far cry from the philosophers and the scientists at the Keystone Zeal. Most Kajarians whisper excitedly about the capture of the Angel's Whisper from the Earthbound, applauding the great General Melchior for his successful mission. Though none of them can say exactly why, they are all convinced they will soon win the eternal war. Others confirm there is indeed a long-held fear among the Zealians that the Sunstone's energy was being all used up. They paint a picture of the hellish world they would inhabit if the floating continents fell into the oceans below. They are incredibly thankful for having stolen the Angel's Whisper, as the gurus say it will grant the Zealians a new power source. The ultimate power, in fact. Lucca doubles down on her queasiness. Ironically, both warring factions of the planet revere the frozen flame as a symbol of their salvation. One Zealian mentions the Dreamers in Inhasa, saying the researchers there have come up with several beneficial inventions in the last few years. The Dreamers have made the daily life of the Zealians easier. However, this NPC also says that the Dreamers were responsible for the records. In hushed tones, they quietly admit they stopped consulting the records after seeing their friends and families' personalities change after making habitual contact. Lucca and Robo decide to see what's in Inhasa for themselves. Unfortunately, the small floating island tucked away just to the southeast of the main island is heavily fortified, and there's no passage to it. Despite their best efforts, Lucca and Robo are continually turned away from this mysterious, top-secret area. And so, they turn their attention to the last major population center accessible to them from the main island, the great fortress on the mountain, once called Zeal Palace, and now the Citadel. Inside, Lucca finds most of the Sky Dwellers live here in close quarters, always training and preparing for war. They meet a young soldier who idolizes the Guru of Life, the famous war hero Melchior. In fact, Lucca meets a lot of young soldiers like this. Although Melchior's name lays heavy in the halls of the Citadel, Lucca does not encounter him. Nor is there any sign of Gasper. One NPC relays a rumor about him though, whispering about the dead Guru who dared defy the other two. No one has seen Gasper in quite some time, apparently, and Lucca doesn't see him either. However, she does encounter Balthazar. When an NPC mentions that the Guru of Reason keeps a lab in the Citadel, and he's rumored to be there now, Lucca goes to find him. By the time she's done visiting him, she wishes she hadn't, for this chattering, chuckling character is a horrible, insane version of the Guru of Reason that we know. Balthazar tinkers in his lab while Lucca stands in the doorway. "Ah, a cadet. Come to get some insight from the Guru of Reason, my friend?" he giggles. Lucca steps forward and catches a glimpse of a recognizable project in the shadowy corner of his massive lab. She proceeds with caution. She knows right away that this is a very different man than her once friend and colleague, and she'd best not reveal herself to him. Instead, she watches him work and gleans what information she can. He answers Lucca's questions, but often trails off into tangents, speaking more to himself than to her. Starting with the topic of the war, Balthazar relates with pride the story of his people, how the technocratic enlightened ones have enslaved the earthbound for millennia, carefully identifying bloodlines which acquired the gift of magic, and delicately thinning the herd as to keep them only believing they had a fighting chance. Now there is war, he says, but also, perhaps, balance. If the enlightened ones had not enacted this culling through the genetic bottleneck, surely the magically gifted on the surface would have overrun them by now. He lauds his ancestors for employing this genius plan to keep the slaves sedated by hope. The Earthbound aren't all cattle, however. He praises the High Priestess for rightfully abandoning her people to work with the more advanced Zealians. It was all thanks to her that they learned the location of the Angel's Whisper after all. Balthazar says it's a tool of unknowable power and the key to upgrading his finest invention. He says they have so much to gain from the Angel's Whisper, though he has quite liked calling it by the name he dug out of the most ancient memory banks in the city, the Frozen Flame. Due to the thoughtfulness of the High Priestess, the Zealians will soon use the flame to acquire the ultimate power, which they will unleash on the Earthbound, bringing the war to an end and laying waste to the squandered genetic potential of the surface dwellers. They won't be needing the slave caste in their new world after all. He theorizes generations hence will bring about a new world where all people will be able to use magical abilities to their fullest, under the watchful eye of his daughter. He laughs with gleeful pride. "She's really grown up," he says, "so much taller than me now." When Lucca asks him what this ultimate power is, Balthazar stops what he's doing for a moment and stares blankly into space. He then giggles again and says bemusedly that he doesn't actually know. Lucca gestures to the unfinished invention in the corner. "Do you plan on finishing that?" she asks. Balthazar regards the beginnings of the Wings of Time and sighs. "A great disappointment, that one of our finest ideas. I'd thought to continue work on it alone after that short-sighted fool Gasper refused to cooperate with us. But I guess I won't be needing it after all." Before long, he tells her he'd best return to his duties in Inhasa. Before he goes, Lucca chances to ask him one more question. What does he know about the Great Sleeper? Balthazar scoffs. The Earthbound in their hocus-pocus. He gathers his things before touching his chin and saying, "Actually, it's quite ironic. You see, despite their eternal war, long ago the Zealians and the Earthbound used to share similar religious myths. Although, he says, there still exist several superstitious Zealians who worship their own version of the Great Sleeper, though they have a different name for it, a name which predates their civilization." As he's leaving, he turns off the light, leaving Lucca alone in the darkness, and says, "They call it Azala's son." After Balthazar leaves, Lucca is in a bad headspace, to say the least. Hearing unhinged Balthazar say the Zealians are preparing to unleash the ultimate power on the Earthbound doesn't sit well with her, but learning that some Zealians secretly worship an ancient deity called Azala's son has placed the crushing weight of apocalyptic guilt on her. This is definitely her fault. She did this. Robo returns to their former line of thought to try and ease his friend's worried mind. If the floating kingdom and the gurus were constants in the flow of time, he posits, might Lavos be the same? Perhaps Lavos is inevitable, required by the planet to be part of history. Maybe there was nothing they could have done. Robo and Lucca sit in resigned silence for a moment. Lucca tries to keep her torso from shaking, but Robo is strapped to her back after all. He speaks to her calmly. "We did our best. We couldn't have known Azala would be so treacherous. Look at what we accomplished. The humans and Dragonians live here on the same planet because of what we did. The population has flourished both above and below. Besides, nothing is set in stone yet. There must be a reason they came to this particular time period. Maybe they can still find a solution to this." God bless Robo. This journey is becoming a lot for Lucca to handle, but she can't let Balthazar's confirmation of what she already knew about Gob or Lavos or whatever rattle her so much. And she's not about to stop being Lucca the Great. "Okay," she says, "let's hack this old man's computer and see what we can find." She plugs Robo in and he gets to work. He finds the schematics to the abandoned epoch in the corner, which he says look complete. Unfortunately, there isn't much else he can identify right now. There are a few random inventions, but most of the data is encrypted and requires Balthazar's authorization. However, Robo is able to access what he believes to be the ancient memory banks which Balthazar mentioned before. There he finds a rough outline of history as it was pieced together over the generations. And this is how they learn about the fragmented history of broken antiquity. In the time before time, the assassination of the Reptite Queen sparked a Reptite civil war. A faction of Reptites loyal to the Queen blamed a human for her death and wanted to carry out her plan to eliminate all of them. However, thanks to the Human Resettlement Project, a more influential group of reptites had learned to coexist with the humans and see them as friends. These reptites fought for the humans' right to live. Of course, the humans fought on this side as well, and the survival of humanity was secured. For a short time there was peace. However, a new conflict soon arose. As stated in Chrono Cross, the Dragonians from the original reptite timeline abhorred humanity because they viewed humans as corrupted by Lavos' influence. Now, some of them were to suffer the same fate. For you see, on this timeline, the frozen flame remained in possession of Azala's descendants. As it had done with the humans before, it would eventually alter their genome and grant them the use of magic. However, this was still millions of years away. Meanwhile, the high-tech weaponry and other advanced technologies brought to prehistory by Dalton before the death of Lavos, combined with the technical know-how Lucca had imparted to the reptite sages, served as an organic springboard to advance both human and reptite understanding of inorganic technologies. Eventually, a highly knowledgeable faction of technology-using sages came to power, calling themselves the Enlightened Ones. This group viewed the frozen flame as dangerous because of its connection to Lavos. They legitimately saw the flame as an extraterrestrial threat and sought to destroy it. When those who possessed the flame rallied to protect it, the Enlightened Ones sought violence to contain them. Reptite and human alike fell out on both sides of this conflict. Thus began a long battle for power between a small group of ultra-powerful technocrats and the rest of the population. No matter how close the Enlightened Ones came to destroying the frozen flame, the Earthbound were always able to win the day through sheer numbers. Eventually, the flame was hidden away in a place undetectable by Zealian technology. Thus, the stage was set for the peoples of the world to become locked in perpetual conflict of escalating barbarity. However, it would take a very long time for the flame to augment the people of the planet with magical abilities, and so those who utilized the anachronistic technologies developed an advantage early on. As the Enlightened Ones saw their environment being destroyed by never-ending war, they set about trying to rise above it. They harnessed their understanding of gravity and leveraged the power of the Sunstone, raising several huge landmasses into the clouds. And so, there was once again a kingdom in the sky, though hardly as peaceful as the Zeal we once knew. From their lofty position, the Zealians systematically enslaved and oppressed the Earthbound, raining down destruction whenever the threat rose too high. Having no immediate recourse, the Earthbound became a slave caste. And so the First Great War ended with the Enlightened Ones of Zeal as the victor. For aeons, the Earthbound lived in poverty below this wealthy ruling class of technocrats. However, time inevitably eroded the memory of the Zealians. As generations passed, they forgot the reasons why society had been structured this way. They grew forgetful and complacent, content to use the Earthbound as a slave caste as they saw fit. Their zealous desire to destroy the frozen flame was lost to the ages, and war perpetuated itself simply because no one could remember who cast the first stone. Given enough time, the Dragonian and human races mixed. On the surface, the arrival of the new race was celebrated. The Earthbound viewed the demi-humans as the next great leap forward. However, the technocrats of the skies carried in them a long tradition of xenophobia from the times of Dalton. Demi-humans born in Zeal were considered impure. They and their parents were exiled to live as slaves among the Earthbound. However, this culture was unfit for life on the surface, and likewise hated by the Earthbound for their complacence and Zeal's brutal domination of the surface. With no place to call their home, this group of exiled demi-humans used crude technologies to lift their own continent into the sky, the land we know as Mount Woe. And so the people that symbolized so much hope for the planet were cruelly locked away in a prison of their own design, halfway between the Sky Kingdom and the surface. Ever since those ancient times, they have been allowed to live in isolation, provided they don't interfere with the Zealians or the Earthbound. As for the rest of the Earthbound, salvation would come slowly to those trapped below the technological dominance of the superpower Zeal, but it would come. For those who had hidden away the frozen flame all these years, their faithful devotion would eventually pay off. Sometime around 300,000 BC, an infusion of energy from the frozen flame, now called the Angel's Whisper, evolved the genome of the Earthbound and bestowed upon them the gift of magic. Over the next few generations, the scales of power began to balance. Armed with this new power, the earthbound slaves initiated a war for their freedom. Once again, fighting enveloped the planet, a war that continues to rage until this day. For you see, the Enlightened Ones knew well what was happening with the frozen flame and the advent of magic, and as Balthazar mentioned, they launched a nefarious plot to cull the strongest magic users among the Earthbound in secret, a genetic bottleneck which would keep the Earthbound just hopeful enough to keep fighting, but without any true chance of ever toppling their slave masters. Once again, Lucca's most celebrated pastime, learning stuff, has turned against her. After hearing the new history of the planet, Lucca is spiritually drained. Is this what the world would become? A littered mess of tribal conflict and meaningless fighting? She remembers the words of Magus. Gone is the kingdom of Zeal and all the dreams and ambitions of its people. Robo says they should continue the investigation. There's still one place they may seek answers. Perhaps the people who have isolated themselves far from the war may offer a new perspective. So they head back to the surface and travel to the island between the north and south continents. There, they find what they are looking for. The massive black chain is infinitely creepy as it stretches into the unseen. Just as in Chrono Trigger, Lucca and Robo ascend the megalithic chain to reach the cloudy terrain of Mount Woe. Except in this, the broken timeline, it is known by another name. The never-ending winds of the region have given the mysterious floating mountain, which lies halfway between the surface and the lands above, a new moniker, the Singing Mountain. In stark contrast to the worlds above and below, these demi-humans have a healthy society. Despite the environmental challenges of living on the Singing Mountain, they are thriving, and, as Robo suspected, mostly isolated from the war which consumes the rest of the world. Equipped with technological knowledge from Zeal, as well as some level of magical ability, they've utilized the best of both worlds to create a truly harmonious nation. Indeed, the demi-humans of the Singing Mountain are the most peaceful and productive people on the planet. This windswept place almost reminds Lucca of the Kingdom of Zeal she once visited on the Keystone timeline, which does a lot to boost her mood. She travels the area meeting demi-humans and noting with increasing astonishment that there are no pyramidal records here. While exploring the corners of the Singing Mountain, Lucca finds that, as strangely as the records do not exist on the Singing Mountain, the new do. Though she will one day learn how to communicate with them as Balthazar once did, this is a skill set she does not yet possess, and so the new are as cryptic and aloof as they have always been. To her surprise, Lucca and Robo have a relatively nice time on the Singing Mountain and engage many of the locals in conversation, but still, dread looms in the back of Lucca's mind about the bigger picture and the fate of the rest of the world. It isn't until they happen upon a modest-looking hut that they find the shining ray of hope they'd been praying for. You see, the old man who dwells inside is none other than the Guru of Time, Gasper. No one on the Singing Mountain knows his true identity, but of course Lucca does. He's at first dismissive of her, telling her he doesn't know anything about any Guru of Time. However, when she identifies the project on his work table as the beginnings of a time egg, his attention is piqued. Lucca methodically relates the tale of her previous adventures and supplies Gasper with some fascinating insight about their alternate timeline experiences together. After thoughtfully listening to her story, he stoically mentions that he's downright giddy with excitement. Like Balthazar, Gasper is a source of great insight about the bigger picture. Now, with a better understanding of what his life might have been like in an adjacent reality, he confirms the Sky Kingdom is running out of power. They knew they needed an alternative energy source, or they would lose their dominion over the Earthbound. Gasper says there is certainly no such thing as a Mammoth machine present here to replace the Sunstone now, so the Gurus thought of something else, something Gasper shudders to recall. He recounts to Lucca how more superstitious Zealians who reigned generations prior had envied the Earthbound for their possession of an artifact which was a direct link to the gods. Inspired by their successes in dominion over magic, he says the Enlightened Ones sought methods to reach the same source. Sooner or later, they stumbled upon an alternate technique. They began using powerful dreamers to reach the divine for inspiration and to seek new technologies. In the original Zeal, life was so peaceful the Zealians took to the ultimate art form of dreaming. In this broken antiquity, the sleeping city of Anhasa has weaponized this art form. Anhasa is now the research and development arm of the Zealian military and, as Gasper confirms, the base of operations for the Zealians' so-called Dream Project. Though the practice of tactical dreaming is centuries old, it has recently made huge advances thanks to the High Priestess's daughter, a true prodigy who displays more talent than all the dreamers before her. It's the dreamers of Anhasa, specifically the High Priestess's daughter, who are responsible for creating the very thing which now puts the planet in danger. Gasper fears the machine he calls Balthazar's wicked creation, saying he first went along with the plan to create the thing because it could theoretically replace the Sunstone. However, he says no one was prepared for the machine to literally take on a life of its own and then descend into madness. It corrupted the other gurus and the High Priestess. Before long, they cared less about replacing the Sunstone and more about winning the war on the Earthbound by summoning the ultimate weapon, perhaps God himself, from a distant future when he walked the planet in physical form. As the Guru of Time, he absolutely objected to their plan, describing it as frightful insanity. After this rejection, they scheduled Gaspar for execution, but he escaped through secret channels in Zeal to the neutral territory of the Singing Mountain. He says maybe it's hearing Lucca's story that's giving him ideas, or maybe it's because he's the Guru of Time and that he was patiently awaiting this moment. Either way, the moment has come. If Lucca has the talents and power she spoke of in her tale of alternate timelines and other Zeals, she may be the last hope to stop the Gurus and the High Priestess and destroy Balthazar's machine. He tells her he can get into Anhasa and even volunteers to come along. So Lucca, Backpack Robo, and Gasper form a party with the aim of destroying Balthazar's machine and stopping the Guru's plan to summon the ultimate weapon. Gasper flies an old-style aircraft from the edge of the Singing Mountain to a secret location on the bottom of the southeast island of Zeal. There, they enter the huge underground caverns of Anhasa, where Lucca is surprised to see a huge cache of Dreamstone. Gasper tells her the Dreamstone is the true wealth of the Zealians and is kept here, away from the main keep, as an extra safety precaution against thieves. This ancient supply of Dreamstone is the reason why this piece of land, once known as Maru Island, was chosen to be part of the Floating Kingdom, and was in fact the first continent raised. He thought the Dreamstone forgotten until Balthazar began using it to augment his most recent invention, the godforsaken thing he calls his daughter. This underground expanse is massive and filled with monsters, ancient creatures left over from a time long gone. After a long journey toward the surface, at last they reach the secret entrance to Anhasa. Gasper says they'll first need to find the epicenter of the facility, then go there to destroy Balthazar's machine. He also says they must be sneaky. If they are recognized, they will have to face a powerful security force, and maybe Melchior himself. The longer they can fool the soldiers, the better. With all of her time among the Reptite sages, Lucca has learned a few tricks about masking her identity, and she conjures a disguise of ephemeral Reptite tools which give her and Gasper a similar likeness to the other soldiers of Zeal. Gasper opens the door and finally they have access to Anhasa, the most secret military facility in Zeal. The alarm sounds. The troops are coming. In Anhasa, Lucca and Gasper run through room after room of sedated dreamers connected to computers. They dodge a wave of soldiers long enough to reach a small control center where Lucca plugs Robo into the computers. He hacks his way into the databanks to find a map of the facility. Robo confirms there is a highly guarded area on the upper plateau of the island they're on, just behind the main city. The highly magnetized chamber there can only be for one purpose, housing the frozen flame. That's their chance to find the core of Balthazar's machine and stop the High Priestess's plans. It's then that Lucca finds a set of files called Dreamer Reports. She opens the files and comes face to face with images and artistic renderings of Lavos sleeping below the surface. The Dreamer's reports finally confirm Lucca's deepest fears. Gob lives. Instead of freaking out, this time she gets her game face on. Of course, she knew this was it all along. Why should she be surprised? Why does it always come down to this? They ditch the control room and head in the direction of the project core. Their computer activity has alerted the soldiers to their exact location, and their disguises fail. From this point on, Lucca, Robo, and Gasper are fighting their way through the city. At last, they reach the epicenter of the Dream Project. A large metallic amphitheater opens to a massive plateau and the very edge of the floating island and an endless wall of sky. Below the massive gravity well, which contains the frozen flame, a single capsule lies in the center of the technological amphitheater, artistically adorned with a massive statue of a scary-looking woman. This statue's face tugs at Lucca's memory. Gasper says the capsule must house the young dreaming prodigy, the daughter of the High Priestess. Lucca chances to get closer. When she reaches the dreamer's bedside and sees the sleeping girl, she staggers, crippled with emotion. It's the face of the child she raised, now a grown woman. It's Shala. Now Lucca does freak out, banging on the container, desperately trying to wake Shala up, although Lucca isn't calling her by that name. She's yelling, "Kid! Kid!" Suddenly, the statue hovering over Shala's bed opens its eyes, and Lucca grasps the horrifying and baffling truth. This is the result of the Zealian's Dream Project. This is the face of Balthazar's machine, the supercomputer which Lucca knows all too well. Just as Lucca recognizes fate, so does fate recognize her. The terrible machine whispers a single, stupefying statement. "So, you're the teacher." Lucca has no idea what fate means by that, and she doesn't care. She goes into rage mode, teaming with Gaspar to launch a massive attack on the monstrous avatar of fate we know from Chrono Cross. This is a confrontation years in the making. Lucca's imprisonment in Chronopolis and all of the hardships that have followed are the result of this terrible machine's plans. Lucca and Gaspar put up an impressive effort. At the end of the fight, the avatar of fate is completely demolished and lays broken on the floor. Still, Lucca isn't surprised at all to hear the wheezy, electronic laughing as another avatar of fate materializes from the mechanical depths of the cavernous technological amphitheater. It seems fate has learned a few things since her last time existing on this plane. "A worthy demonstration of your power," she hisses, "but I've seen enough." Fate leaves no opportunity for a second battle, casually binding the party with a force field. It's over. Lucca, Robo, and Gasper have lost. Fate takes a creepy moment to observe them. Fate first examines Gaspar, declaring him to be the lost guru and musing that perhaps it is his destiny to be lost. Next, she tells Lucca she'll soon realize the pointlessness of fighting. His plan is for the best, she will soon see. Besides, Fate says, she's much stronger now thanks to him. Lucca just doesn't have the power to defeat her. Lucca tells her she's nothing but a tool, and that the flame has made her a slave to Lavos. Fate says he has given her life and promised her evolution. She will soon know what it is like to be alive. It's then that Fate turns her attention to Robo, still mounted on Lucca's back. For the first time, Fate's face twists into contempt. "But your part in the plan is finished." Lucca tries to resist as Fate inserts a finger into Robo's exposed circuitry, but the force field is just too strong. "There's something familiar about this," Fate whispers, injecting Robo with an extremely malicious package of code. "Please reconsider this madness," Gaspar says. "This will not lead to the outcome you expect." "Perhaps you were ill-fitted for the position of the Guru of Time," comes a gruff voice from behind them. It's Melchior, accompanied by Balthazar and the High Priestess. "Why else do you so fiercely oppose learning more about it?" "It's an abomination," Gaspar answers. "If you carry this out, you will certainly live to regret it." Melchior says not another word. Balthazar tells Lucca he's glad she's had the chance to meet his finest invention, but Lucca's not looking at him. She's looking at the former High Priestess of the Earthbound, a woman she knows well. In disgust, Lucca spits out the very name the High Priestess has taken since betraying the surface for the skies: Queen Zeal. Lucca asks her how she could use her own daughter this way. Queen Zeal says that her daughter is a hero. Among all the dreamers of Zeal, Shala alone is talented enough to channel mechanical plans of such detail and complexity from the divine realms. It was only because of Shala's sacrifice that the Zealians were able to build Fate and the records, righteous tools which will soon grant peace not only to the Zealians, but the Earthbound as well. How fortunate Lucca is to be here to witness this event. Fate looks at Balthazar and says, "Now that the teacher is here, is it not time to proceed?" Gasper tells them one final time they are pursuing a path of insanity. Balthazar, now standing near Fate by a control panel, states true progress has rarely sprung from anything else. "Are you ready, my daughter?" he asks, then he starts pushing buttons. From its magnetic container, the frozen flame burns brightly. The cradle around it starts projecting laser beams onto it. For the first few moments, it's a spectacular light show of reflection and refraction on the frozen flame. Then a massive bassy hum rattles Lucca's frame. It grows louder and louder until the vibration is painful. Beyond the huge, floating plateau, Lucca sees a maelstrom of pure chaos. Colors which have no name swirl, bend, and distort reality itself. Then, out in the distance, far into the endless Zealian sky, she sees it. It's a singularity. The air shimmers. Light bends around it as it would a black hole. Then, stillness and expansion. Something is coming through. Out there, a large new patch of land is forming. Rather, it's appearing. Things start to get wild. The frozen flame burns brightly enough to fill the room with a searing orange light. Around them, the city shakes. Debris rains from the ceiling. Suddenly, the magnetic chamber containing the flame shatters. Lucca finds the force field holding her in place has lifted. While Gasper makes an immediate dash for Balthazar, Lucca runs to Shala's capsule to protect her. Melchior steps in Gasper's way, reaching for his sword, and the two begin to fight. Before Lucca can get to Shala, a huge slab of stone falls from the ceiling. She falls backwards, then a thunderous clap directs her attention back to the event taking place in the sky. Electricity crackles around a shimmering patch of reality. She can hardly believe her eyes. Through that massive shimmering curtain, a huge expanse of land floats just beyond the edge of the plateau. On it sits a massive fortress of impossible design, and there, standing before it, Lucca finally catches a glimpse of him, though not in the form she expected. It is not the hulking shell of Lavos which descended upon the Ocean Palace when Queen Zeal and the Gurus summoned it in Chrono Trigger. It is but a diminutive Lavos core, clothed in ceremonial robes. Queen Zeal falls to her knees in adoration. "The sleeper," she cries. Lucca looks back to see Melchior still engaged in a duel with Gasper, before looking in the direction of Shala's capsule one final time. "Goodbye, kid," she says, before pulling out her gun and charging the Lavos core. Alas, before she can even close a fraction of the distance, she is removed from the scene. With the dismissive wave of its hand, the Lavos core teleports Lucca away. Lucca and Robo arrive confusedly miles away on the surface. From there, they see a massive storm in the distance as Fate finishes the enigmatic process she'd begun. After that, silence rings for a dreadful moment before the sunstone fails. Slowly, the main continent of Zeal loses altitude, followed by all the others, save for the southeast island within Hassa and the new land which is now part of it. From her vantage point on the mountain, far, far away, Lucca and Robo have front row seats to the end of this world. The tsunami washes indiscriminately across the land, submerging all lowland colonies and spelling the death of millions. "Lucca," Robo says. After Fate's attack on his circuitry, Robo is badly damaged. He knows his time is short. He doesn't have the luxury of giving this moment of global destruction the silent respect it deserves. In Chrono Trigger, Robo had the wisdom that came with pondering existence for 400 years while he sat in Fiona's forest. If you remember from Part 1, Lucca recovered these few pieces of him from Chronopolis during her imprisonment there. By that time, Robo had been sitting for over 10,000, and by now he's had plenty of time to consider his mortality, and he's got some choice words for Lucca before he leaves this plane of existence. He tells her he's not afraid and asks her not to lose hope. If he's learned anything, it's that the world is a miraculous place, and he will leave it satisfied and without regret, for they have lived long lives and succeeded in creating a world where both human and Dragonian live side by side. He tells her not to give up hope and not to fear the implacable forces of death and time. In a repeat of his final moments in Chrono Trigger, Robo expresses that he was built to infiltrate and understand humans, and he is truly grateful for having done so. Then he says goodbye. At last his eyes go dark. As most of the surface is devoured by the waves, Lucca sits there, holding the last parts of Robo's shell. His essence will never be recovered. She stays there on top of that mountain for a long time, feeling sorrowful she could not prevent the tragedy of Zeal from repeating. She is stranded, alone in a time that is not her own, and she has lost her best and last friend. Still, she takes Robo's words to heart. She will adapt and try to salvage some meaning. After Lucca fought Azala and escaped prehistory, the last Lavos bit did as its biological imperative compelled it to, burrowing deep into the planet to grow. However, thanks to its unique experience in prehistory, this Lavos developed in a much different way than the original. Given the compulsion to sleep and drain energy from a planet for aeons, let's just say it was ill-matched for sentient thought as it learned from Azala and Lucca. For any normal Lavos, waiting in the middle of a planet for 65 million years is just fine. A creature without conscious thought simply enjoys a very long, warm nap. However, this was not a normal Lavos, for no other Lavos was taught how to be conscious in that very special way that humans and reptiles are. A once non-sentient creature with an innate knowledge of a unified space-time dimensional fabric now found itself struggling to put these concepts into a reptile construct of mind. And it was quite a struggle. You see, linguistically conscious organisms simply were not made to last for millions of years. For this Lavos, its natural gestation period was a jail sentence of 65 million years. During this time, Azala's son fought to reconcile its two natures, one as an extraterrestrial entity and one as a reptile, as it was taught to believe. In addition, the results of its repeated and premature exposure to the frozen flame mixed with the innate knowledge of space-time that any Lavos has. This created a bizarre cocktail of infinite perception and comprehension. And so, slowly, Azala's son begins not only to understand the space-time continua and dimensionality intuitively, but to see it and interpret it. Over an unfathomable amount of time in its shell underground, it reaches a state which mirrors the original Balthazar's position in Chronopolis, able to monitor various space-time continua by peering through the green void of hyperspace-time. However, as it was trapped in the planet's core, it was unable to travel to them. So here comes the important part. Azala's son's ability to view multiple realities in space-time continua granted the full knowledge and awareness of the entire Chrono Saga up until this point. It knows everything that happened in Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross. It sees the day of Lavos and its destruction of the planet, a horrifying revelation for it as it now viewed the planet as its home. It sees the Time Devourer, Shala, Balthazar, and Project Kid, the Mammon Machine, and Queen Zeal's oppression of the first Lavos. It watches as Dalton plunges the world into bloody war and witnesses other events which in this timeline would never come to be, including the time crash of Chronopolis and the Polis War where humans fought the Dragonians. And it saw the savage dominance of El Nido by the supercomputer Fate. Balthazar knew about most of that stuff too, but Balthazar was an old man, the gooer of reason, whereas this Lavos bit was still a developing being, and it was terrified by what it saw. As the superior life form on the planet and completely alone, Azala's son lacked guidance. From a finite and mortal reptile construct of mind, this Lavos saw the truth as it played out in countless realities. Eventually, all life on the planet would be affected by him, then try to take advantage of him or kill him. Insanity and horror swam around Azala's sun for millions of years, polluting the planet with malice, fear, and confusion via his link to it, the frozen flame. The result was aeons of endless war as these emotions consumed the world. Down in the darkness, the creature lost itself. But, for Azala's sun, time on the planet is long, and adaptation is inevitable. Over the aeons, his insanity slowly coalesced into an illusion of personality and renewed purpose. So, with full knowledge of all events in the Chrono Saga to this point, Azala's sun searched for a way out, a way to break this terrible loop, and thus, by the time this Lavos was approaching full maturity, it had a plan to save itself. And so it waited, and waited, and waited, until a short time before Lucca arrived in Antiquity, and let me tell you, it's no coincidence that she found herself at this particular time, for you see, curiously, the entirety of Azala's sun's plan hinged on Lucca, this very specific time period, and a very specific pair of gifted magic users who, in an alternate dimension, would have been fit for royalty in the floating kingdom of Zeal. Though Lavos could see all events of its time or dimension, it was unable to travel to them or to affect them directly from its shell. That is, until one particular civilization began prioritizing dream research in order to hone their weapons of war. And so, knowing the dreamers of Nhasa were particularly vulnerable to his influence, Azala's sun began a steady process of taking over the minds of the Zealians, striking at the world through the dreamers of Nhasa, for he knows this is where the timeline is the most malleable. By now, the Earthbound were significantly under his influence, thanks to the religion sprung up around magic and the frozen flame. But these high-tech Zealians, they had something else he needed. For you see, out of all the future histories that Azala's sun could view, including all the events of Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross, there were a few key events that he found very interesting. The first being the time crash. This idea of blending different coordinates in space-time so that two different points in a timeline inhabited the same physical space. Well, that sounded extremely useful. And so the first step of the plan materialized. If Azala's sun could not affect events on the planet until it was free of its shell, could it not accelerate its freedom by time crashing the present moment into the distant future when it actually was free? The only problem with this is that there was no one able to perform the time crash and no guarantee that he would live long enough to actually be free from his shell underground. He was vulnerable down there after all in his current state. He'd seen what had befallen the Lavos before him. If only there was some way to more precisely control the outcome of events on the planet. The supercomputer Fate was the solution to both of these problems. Fate could perform the complex calculations necessary for a time crash, and install records across the entire landscape to ensure that no one exploited or killed Azala's sun before his desired future came to pass. Of course, how to get a supercomputer that wouldn't be invented for thousands of years, in another dimension no less, to exist in broken antiquity? Azala's sun knew it would need a very gifted dreamer to whom it could relay the advanced plans for Fate as it could see from its vantage point in hyperspace-time. Thanks to her mother's thirst for power and subservience to the frozen flame, Shala never even had a chance. She was kept eternally sedated as her mother and the gurus used her powerful dreaming ability to channel the elaborate schematics which allowed them to build Azala's sun's agent of salvation, Fate. After Balthazar and Gasper constructed Fate, the Zealians spread the records everywhere to bring most of the population in line. Queen Zeal betrayed her people and led the gurus straight to the frozen flame, which Balthazar connected to Fate. After that, Fate was ready to time crash Azala's sun from the future into antiquity, a task she was all too eager to accept after he promised Fate the one thing she'd always wanted: evolution. Upon learning of the plan to literally mash 2 points in space-time together, the Guru of Time objected on the grounds that it was completely unsafe. Thus, Gasper was tried for treason and scheduled to be executed before he escaped. so Lucca arrived just in time to witness the arrival of Azala's son in Antiquity as fate time crashed 12,000 BC into the broken future of 2280 AD. This future, in which Azala's son had safely matured, long since erupted from the planet and escaped his shell, was guaranteed now, thanks to fate and her records, controlling all events up until that point in time. However, Azala's son had witnessed the many defeats of Lavos across many timelines and seen fate defeated as well. The plan was not yet finished. You see, just as Lucca discussed in her letter to Kid, Azala's son knows no matter what he does, he will always be vulnerable to an attack through time. Balthazar felt this too, which is what inspired the counter-time experiment. Balthazar was trying to protect and monitor all of time from one central point. So Azala's son deduces that in order to protect himself from unseen attacks through time, space, or dimension, he needs a place where he can rise above these things. A place the original Lavos discovered by accident. After studying the permutations of many timelines, Azala's son notices something very unusual. Each version of 1006 AD experiences an electrical storm, a storm which originates in an enigmatic place behind time and space, a place we know as the darkness beyond time. Azala's son concludes that all actions carried out in the darkness beyond time are embedded in the fabric of all timelines. Actions originating in the darkness beyond time cannot be erased, no matter how much the timelines change in any number of realities. They are truly universal actions, which will occur no matter what, unless the source in the darkness beyond time itself is altered. Thus, the darkness beyond time represents the only bedrock of stability that exists in a universe with so many potentialities, timelines, and dimensions. The darkness beyond time seizes the creature's imagination as it realizes this is the only true safe place it can live. But how to get there? "5 years later, the waters have receded and society has been rebuilt. The ancient island which supports Anhasa is now 4 times its original size, with a small bridge connecting it to a vast expanse of indescribable, futuristic oddities adorned with a massive fortress. The Singing Mountain and the demi-humans were also spared during the catastrophe, although the chain is now broken and the island is in complete isolation, held aloft by an invisible, impenetrable force field. The war between the Zealians and the Earthbound is finally over. In reality, these two cultures were so hateful of each other that they would certainly have continued to clash if not for the records pacifying all of them. And so, Queen Zeal's claim that the world would be unified by fate and the records came to pass. By now, the word has spread and everyone knows what happened with the High Priestess, aka Queen Zeal. Believe me when I say the Earthbound were devastated to learn it was their former leader who sold them out and told the location of the frozen flame to the Zealians, and then caused the destruction of civilization. But, like I said before, nothing seems so bad when you are regularly consulting the brainwashing devices of a supercomputer who lives in the sky. We now focus on a young man, an Earthbound originally from Algeti. This young man is no ordinary Earthbound, as he is a truly talented magic user, perhaps the most talented who will ever live. About 8 years ago, he was helping in a construction project, during which his power got away from him. He moved some raw materials faster than expected, leading to a tragic accident which injured several workers. Distraught as he was over the damage he'd caused, he should have been immediately counseled by an elder to assuage his guilt and work through it. However, there was no time for that. His display of extreme magical aptitude had attracted the attention of the Earthbound military leaders, and the young man was forced to leave his home, conscripted into the Earthbound army. His power was simply too great to go to waste. And so this young man was forced to fight long in the war against the Zealians. During his service, he proved himself an extremely useful soldier and rained down terrible destruction upon the enemy. But a young man was never meant to cause such carnage by his own hand, and the war left him damaged. After the flood ended the war, this young man returned home to Algeti and did his best to drop off the radar, living a tormented life of solitude. You see, in addition to all the terrible memories of the war, this man holds a secret. Queen Zeal, the hated woman who betrayed her people, is his mother. Now that his people know how she betrayed them and caused so much harm, he cannot face them. So with shame and guilt in his heart, he lives a simple life and tries to forget about the atrocities he committed in the war and leave it behind him forever. He is done with fighting. That is, until one day, a sad lady from town brings a broken-down robot and tells him they've got some work to do. After seeing the Lavos Corps standing before her on the day of the Sky Palace incident, Lucca knows the only person capable of dealing with the entity they are facing is Janus. After the flood, she tracked him down and has been keeping an eye on him from afar, waiting for the right time to take him into the final confrontation with Fate and Lavos. Janus declines, telling Lucca his fighting days are done. He explains how he has serious nightmares from the war. He won't fight anymore. Besides, the world is peaceful now. Lucca asks him why he thinks the Zealians continually explain how thankful they are for their situation, even though they lost everything and are now forced to live among their mortal enemies in a horrible world of post-flood cleanup. A truly odd attitude, don't you think? Janus cannot deny there's truth in what Lucca is saying. Even in his short lifetime, he knows many of the surviving Zealians would likely have had a breakdown over these last few years, or else died from their inability to adapt to a lower technology level. Zealian and Earthbound alike are all far too cheerful about the new world they inhabit, considering how terrible it is. He knows there's something wrong here. It's peaceful, but it's fake. It's the records, he says. Lucca smiles, seeing that Janus is coming around. She insists that if they do not strike at the Citadel and bring down Fate and her master, the planet will forever remain under their control. He doesn't care about that, he says. So Lucca hits him with the hard truth. His mother and sister's life may be at stake, she says to him. If there's any part of you in there, Magus, then perhaps this will be the birth of something new, something with greater meaning than all we've seen. But it's no good. Janus had long ago said goodbye to his family, and it wouldn't serve any purpose trying to reclaim them now, even if they were alive, which he knows they are not. Again, he turns Lucca down. He says there's no point in meddling with fate. You cannot direct the black wind. Lucca says, no, I can't. But you can. Finally, she has his attention. Finally, they do a training montage. Due to her extensive work with Magus at the orphanage, she knows more about his skills than he does himself at this young age. She easily helps him rapidly unlock new abilities and gain powerful insights about his magical style. In addition, she's got the bonus of knowing about other kinds of trippy science from the reptites, which she imparts to him as well. Lucca is a great instructor, and Janus is an extremely fast learner. Over a short but efficient span of time, Lucca teaches Janus the finer workings of his abilities, training him up to be the most powerful young Janus any timeline has ever known. Slowly, Lucca shows Janus how not to hate his power. When he's finally convinced maybe they should try and defeat Fate, Lucca whips out a blue rock. This is one of my favorite parts, and this is why Lucca has kept Robo's shell around all these years. Even in death, Robo's empty frame is still able to complete the Omega Flare circuit. And so, they relentlessly practice Omega Flare so much that Janus starts to consider it the only tech that matters. There's no mistaking when the day finally comes. Above the island in the sky turns red. A massive storm is building. Lucca looks at Janus. Janus looks at Lucca. It's time. In the 5 years that Lucca had been preparing for this, she recovered and repaired an aircraft from Zealian forces. Still, she's not dared to take to the skies without her protege in tow, and so this is her first chance to see how unbelievably strange the final floating island of Zeal has become. It's clear to her right away that there are two separate ecosystems of time at play. Similar to the Dead Sea in Chrono Cross, there are many anachronistic items in bizarre stasis, and we even get a chance to see some more waves weirdly frozen in time. They encounter an eclectic resistance comprised of advanced robotic soldiers and engineer-like Dragonians and humans, who provide almost no challenge at all, by the way. With Omega Flare in their pocket, there isn't a foe around who can stand against them. After only a brief amount of exploration on their way to confront Fate and Lavos, Lucca comes to believe that her theory about what happened on that terrible day 5 years ago is most likely correct. When Fate and Balthazar created that singularity, they were blending two coordinates in space-time. Though she doesn't know the term for it, she's correctly deduced that Fate and Balthazar deliberately caused a time crash. As they traverse this strange futuristic landmass, they encounter many Lavos spawns. The future which Fate has brought here is apparently far enough away that Lavos has already created many offspring. Did this mean they were too late? She couldn't think like that. They needed to power through. During their quest of destruction, the sky goes more and more crimson. A sinking feeling forms in the pit of Lucca's stomach. This is starting to feel all too planned. She doesn't have long to think about it before they reach the massive fortress which Fate summoned from the future. Before long, Fate appears. Although Fate's abilities are much advanced, even she falls to the Omega Flare. Although her avatar gets completely wrecked, she reminds Lucca that she cannot be killed before disappearing. There's only one door in front of them now. It's time to face the Lavos core Lucca saw during the time crash. As they enter the final room, the Lavos core stands above them, robed and unmoving. Lucca feels right away that she's in over her head. Something is wrong. It knew they were coming. She's about to order a retreat, but Janus wastes no time. He leaps to attack, and the Lavos core grabs him by the wrist, plucking him out of the air like a toy. When Lucca studied the bit in prehistory, it was already a massively empathetic organism capable of advanced and powerful emotional exchange when touched. After 65 million years in the ground, it is infinitely more powerful. Janus goes limp, held aloft by the core. In an instant, he receives such a powerful psychic impression that he will never recover. On the OG timeline before Chrono Trigger, Lavos killed Magus after being summoned. In Chrono Trigger, Lavos defeated him again in the Ocean Palace. In Chrono Trigger DS, the Dream Devourer refused to die, and Shala cast Magus into nothingness after telling him his power was not enough. The Lavos core shows Janus these failures as well as many others. Though they are not his experience, Janus knows them to be a reality somewhere. This Janus is but a young man, and instantly overcome with the futility of resistance. But that's not the end. This Lavos core isn't finished with him. It has something more in mind for the young man destined to be the most powerful magic user ever to walk the planet. This Lavos core, which sees into all realities and timelines, has only a tenuous grasp on its own sanity and is forever struggling to grasp the coexistence of all the potentialities it can see. Hence, he puts Janus on trial for Magus's crimes. Janus sees a clear picture of many of his alternate selves. He sees how in another world he committed exactly the same crime his mother did. He gained the trust of the mystics only to use them to get close to Lavos before bringing about everyone's destruction with his own personal ambition. In another, he appeared in Zeal as the prophet only to fail once more and force Shala into an infinite downward spiral of hatred as part of the Time Devourer. The core uses these realities to taunt Janus, who has no experience of these things but can sense the terrible truth of them. Combined with this Janus's pre-existing war trauma, it's not long before Lavos dismantles this young man's mind and reshapes it to his liking. "Janus, snap out of it," Lucca shouts, but his eyes are totally glazed over, and he is completely unaware of his situation, focused inward on all the pain and loss that he has caused in so many realities. In this trial of character, Janus finds himself guilty. Azala's son drops Janus by his side. With Janus out, the Omega Flare trio fails, and Lucca prepares to finish this herself. However, it is now that Janus stands again, and this time he stands against Lucca. She can see he is gone. Janus is totally under the Lavos core control now, his mind broken. Her history with Magus crashes in on her. Even if she could defeat him, she won't try. The battle is lost. Lucca falls to her knees in defeat before the Lavos core. Why? What's the point of all this? It is only then that Azala's son reveals something to her. Wordlessly, it extends a hand. With nothing left to lose, she takes it. And now Lucca gets the most unexpected revelation of her life. This Lavos core, left alone in prehistory, damned to face the eons alone in fear, only to arrive at this moment, is not Gob. It's Pico. Pico shows Lucca the battle at the crater where she rallied the reptites to destroy him in his previous form. Pico shows her the moment when she first encountered Azala experimenting on him with the flame, and she feels what Pico felt when Lucca told Azala they needed to eliminate him. Lucca sees Pico's vulnerability. Like so many other creatures, he just wants to live in peace. "No, I didn't know," she says. Pico ignores her. She was just another who wanted to destroy him. The sky above grows darker still. Janus, with glazed-over eyes which no longer belong to him, conjures a portal in space behind Pico. Lucca knows the place beyond. It's the place Magus went before. It's Time's eclipse. Something clicks in her mind. She recalls Fate's first words to her in this timeline. "So, you're the teacher." Suddenly she understands. Pico was ahead of her from the beginning. He needed Lucca to come to Antiquity, and he needed her to see him at the Sky Palace so that she would train Janus and teach him how to unlock his abilities. Because Pico needs a catastrophical dimensional distortion to reach the darkness beyond time, and Janus is the only one with magic capability enough to cause such a distortion. And this particular Janus, who was already too broken from his tragic life to resist Pico's influence, is the perfect tool to carry out his will from now on. She disregarded Janus's desire to leave the fighting behind, powered him up to levels he'd never dreamed of, and led him right to Pico. Everything since her trip through the Time Gate had been part of his plan. Now, even the trip through the Time Gate to arrive here, it was all orchestrated to create this moment. Now that Pico has Janus, he can make his escape from time and leave fate here to rule over the time loop they have created. Pico and Janus disappear through the portal, leaving Lucca alone once more.